Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Hobbit Camp Session 7 today. This is our interview with the dragon at long last. Before we get to that, some of the questions to be thinking about for chapters 12 and 13, inside information and not at home. How does Bilbo deal with Smaug? In a general way, is he successful? Is he unsuccessful? Why do you think that? And then maybe think about more specific things too. If he does do a good job, what are the things that he does right? How does one talk to a dragon? Um, uh, does he use things that he's learned on the course of his adventure? That might be one way to think about it. Second big question for today: what treasures and what valuable information does he find? Like I said yesterday, I think of the treasure of the dragon as being, on the one hand, that physical stuff you can pick up and sneak away with, right? There's plenty of that kind of treasure. But maybe even more important is the treasure of wisdom, of knowledge, of finding something out. And certainly there are some examples that we see of that. Again, throughout the adventure, Bilbo gains a lot of things. He gains some physical things like the ring, his knife, sting, right? But he also gains a lot of other things that you can't really see, parts of himself, things that he didn't know before about the world and about who he is. So what information does he bring back from the dragon horde? Cool. More fun activities for today. Of course, journaling on changes that take place in Bilbo and in the dwarves. And there's plenty of examples of those. And a good way to think about the journal is a way for you to kind of put yourself in the character's place. That's always a powerful part of reading these kind of wonderful, fantastic books. As strange and amazing as the adventures are, there's things about them that really connect with everyday experience and things that you might have experienced and memories that you have. So in what ways can you relate to what is going on here with Bilbo, with the dwarves, their reaction to the treasure and the dragon, which is interesting. Of course, you can draw Smaug, his treasure, and the dwarves and Bilbo as they get all geared up here. The story is shifting, and we'll look at that more tomorrow. But one interesting example of that is the way that they change what they're wearing, which is cool, putting on armor. Some games you can play. Just like Bilbo does, you can make up titles for yourself, right? Luck Wearer, right? Barrel Rider. Ooh, that one gets him in trouble. So what might be a fun title to describe you? You can play the game where you have one person who's the dragon, they're sleeping, right? And you take something, one item from the room, and then when they open their eyes, they have to look around and see if they can figure out what you took. So playing thief. Please don't react as violently as Smaug does. It's not that serious, right? It's just a cup after all. Okay, and you can escape the maze. There's a fun maze in your packet. And of course, you can always have more in-depth discussions with your groups and your friends and people you're watching with. I know that I talk a lot on here, and I really, really want to hear from you guys what you're thinking about these things. So if you do come up with some interesting ideas as you're discussing the dragon sickness, right? This feeling of greed that comes over the dwarves when they see the treasure. You want to ask a question about it or want to send in ideas, that's awesome. If not, if you just want to discuss it on your own, that's great too. So that's always a really interesting way to dig into these readings more, discussing them with your folks, with your people. Yeah. So I hope that you're finding something of interest here. I always, every time I read these books, I find such treasures, right, that I never had discovered before. All right, so here's one funny thing here. Not disappointed is my slide here. He did not expect a chorus of volunteers, so he was not disappointed. Volunteers to help him enter the tunnel, of course. Fili and Kili looked uncomfortable and stood on one leg, but the others made no pretense of offering. A pretense is like a show, but not really meaning it, like pretending to offer to help, right? Except old Balin, the lookout man, who was rather fond of the Hobbit. He said he would come inside at least, and perhaps a bit of the way too, ready to call for help if necessary. The most that can be said for the dwarves is this. They intended to pay Bilbo really handsomely for his services. They had brought him to do a nasty job for them, and they did not mind the poor little fellow doing it if he would. But they would all have done their best to get him out of trouble, if he got into it, as they did in the case of the trolls at the beginning of their adventures, before they had any particular reasons for being grateful to him. There it is. Dwarves are not heroes, but calculating folk, with a great idea of the value of money. Some are tricky and treacherous and pretty bad lots. Some are not, but are decent enough people like Thorin and company, if you don't expect too much. So a lot of really interesting little details here that I think I read over, when I was reading this for the first time. I was maybe in third grade or in the summer going into third grade or something like that. So like 8 or 9 years old, I guess. And I just really read straight through the book, just following the adventure and just enjoying without really thinking about it too much. But now, the more that you read this carefully and you go back and you look at it closely, there's even more interesting stuff here. Like the dwarves, right? Like maybe you played the game yesterday of loading them in their boats and kind of trying to remember all the names. The dwarves are hard to kind of get a handle on as the story goes along because they're just kind of like a bunch of people, right? And it's hard to keep track of who's who because their names are all very similar for one thing. But they do have independent personalities. You notice this if you look close here, like Fili and Kili, right? We're told that they're the youngest, and so maybe they're a little bit more sympathetic to Bilbo. They also are kind of the low man on the totem pole in some ways, right? And they're very brave too. They're close relatives, nephews, is it, of Thorin, right? So they, in some ways, have a kind of a stronger investment even than some of the other dwarves because they're closest to Thorin in that sense, right? So okay, so they feel kind of bad that they don't actually help. Too bad for them. Old Balin, though, remember, he's the lookout man. The narrator reminds us here. That little detail, remember? Bilbo snuck by him and then made a big show of how good of a burglar he was. And Balin, he could have taken that the wrong way. He could have been really sour about that when he found out, oh, because he had a magic ring. Right? But no, it's quite the opposite. His esteem and his affection for the Hobbit only grows. And so they were actually quite close, and it's really, I think their relationship, their friendship is really really interesting to see here. So Balin is the one who comes along, right? And the narrator tells us again, right? Dwarves are not heroes, but calculating folk. All right. So keep that description in mind as we go along here. That's quite interesting as well, because that'll come up again. All right. So because Bilbo didn't have his hopes up too much, he wasn't too disappointed. Maybe he was even a little bit surprised that Balin actually goes along. All right, but it comes down to this. Now you are in for it at last, Bilbo Baggins, he said to himself. You went and put your foot right in it that night of the party, and now you have got to pull it out and pay for it. Dear me, what a fool I was and am, said the least tookish part of him. I have absolutely no use for dragon-guarded treasures, and the whole lot could stay here forever, if only I could wake up and find this beastly tunnel was my own front hall at home. He did not wake up, of course, but went still on and on till all sign of the door behind had faded away. He was altogether alone. Soon he thought it was beginning to feel warm. Is that a kind of glow I seem to see coming right ahead down there? He thought. It was. As he went forward, it grew and grew till there was no doubt about it. It was a red light, steadily growing, redder and redder. Also, it was now undoubtedly hot in the tunnel. Wisps of vapor floated up and past him, and he began to sweat. Sound, too, began to throb in his ears, a sort of bubbling like the noise of a large pot galloping on the fire, mixed with a rumble as of a gigantic tomcat purring. This grew to the unmistakable gurgling noise of some vast animal snoring in its sleep down there in the red glow in front of him. So we just got reminded of the troll adventure when the dwarves did come and try to help Bilbo. Not too successfully, but they tried, right? And so here again, we see this red glow. It always seems to be a sign of bad news when you see a red glow out there in the darkness. But this is the only thing he can do. Remember, like down in the tunnel under the goblin caves in the Misty Mountains, right? All he can do is go on. and all he wants to do is wake up and find himself back home, right? If only this was a dream and I'm back in my front hall at home. So again, getting the comparison between this mountain and its cave and his hobbit hole in the hill back home. Those are being kind of connected here. His took side uh, is uh, is weak in this moment, perhaps. His least tookish part is speaking up, "What a fool I was and am," right? And yet, as we've seen in the course of the adventure, being a fool is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. Remember the elves, the wisest people that we've met in this adventure, look like fools. They sing foolish songs. They do foolish things, and yet they know more than they let on, right? Um, so uh, his least tookish part calls him a fool. Maybe it's right, and yet he moves on. The took in him uh, uh, is standing up and going towards the danger here, which is incredible, an incredibly courageous thing to do. Um, so this inner struggle, right, brings him to the bravest thing, right, that he does in the adventure. It was at this point that Bilbo stopped. Going on from there was the bravest thing he ever did. The tremendous things that happened afterwards were as nothing compared to it. He fought the real battle in the tunnel alone, before he ever saw the vast danger that lay in wait. At any rate, after a short halt, go on he did, and you can picture him coming to the end of the tunnel, an opening of much the same size and shape as the door above. Through it peeps the hobbit's little head. Before him lies the great bottommost cellar or dungeon hall of the ancient dwarves, right at the mountain's root. It is almost dark, so that its vastness can only be dimly guessed, but rising from the near side of the rocky floor, there is a great glow, the glow of Smaug. So what's the bravest thing that Bilbo ever does? What did he do that was so brave here? Send in your thoughts here, and picture this, right? Uh, the way that the narration shifts here is interesting. You notice the whole story is in the past tense, right? This happened, and then they were, and then he fought, right? All of that past tense, and then suddenly we jump into a present tense. The narrator tells us you can picture this, and so when you're picturing a story, and whenever you write about stories, you can write in the present tense because it's in some sense always happening when you open the book, when you think about it, when you talk about it. Um, and so the narrator here slips the story into the present. This is happening right now. The hobbit's head peeps through. Before him lies the great dungeon hall, the mountain's root. Um, there is a great glow, right? So it really puts you right there with Bilbo doing this bravest thing. What is the bravest thing? What does he do? It says he fought the real battle in the tunnel alone. What do you think that means? Let's see. I'll give you another minute or two. I hope that, aha, aha, he keeps going. He keeps going. Yes, yes. Um, he goes on when he is most afraid, right? Uh, Paralyzed, um, and then he overcomes that. This picture here, um, yes, yes. The Conversation with Smaug is the title here, and this is one of Tolkien's drawings, his own illustrations, and I give you the credits here for where you can see more information about this image and where it comes from. If you search it and find this link. Um, Again, you can find a lot of Tolkien's drawings out there, and you can get books and calendars and all kinds of cool stuff where they're printed really nicely for you. So this is just a little taste. I know I haven't shown many images, maybe at all so far. I really like to focus on the story, but since this one is by Tolkien, I thought it would be okay to show. So I really like the way that he depicts Smaug here, curled up on the treasure and sort of flicking his tongue out, smelling, uh, although he can't see Bilbo. We can see him a little bit here. He's kind of outlined for us, silhouetted, um, creeping up. One other really interesting thing about the picture here, we see the urns full of treasure. They've got this script written on them, and then another in runic letters below. So two of the different languages that Tolkien invented are given a very prominent, up front, right in the front of this drawing, a prominent place here. Up on the top of the treasure heap, of course, as we learn later, there's a special stone that Bilbo finds first. All right, so the conversation with Smaug here. To say that Bilbo's breath is taken away is no description at all. Right? There are no words left to express his staggerment, since men changed the language that they learned of elves in the days when all the world was wonderful. Bilbo had heard tell and sing of dragon hoards before, but the splendor, the lust, the glory of such treasure had never yet come home to him. His heart was filled and pierced with enchantment and with the desire of dwarves. He gazed motionless, almost forgetting the frightful guardian, at the gold beyond price and count. He gazed for what seemed an age, before, drawn almost against his will, he stole from the shadow of the doorway across the floor to the nearest edge of the mounds of treasure. Above him, the sleeping dragon lay, a dire menace even in his sleep. He grasped a great two-handled cup, as heavy as he could carry, and cast one fearful eye upwards. Smaug stirred a wing, opened a claw, the rumble of his snoring changed its note. Then Bilbo fled. But the dragon did not wake, not yet, but shifted into other dreams of greed and violence, lying there in his stolen hall, while the little hobbit toiled back up the long tunnel. His heart was beating, and a more fevered shaking was in his legs than when he was going down. But still he clutched the cup, and his chief thought was, I've done it. This will show them. More like a grocer than a burglar indeed. Well, we'll hear no more of that. Okay. So the first thing the narrator tells us here is that he cannot describe the feeling of seeing this treasure. There are literally no words, right? Highlighted those ancient languages there on the urn full of treasure, right? Maybe in the ancient language there would be a way to describe what this feels like, but it no longer exists, right? That's been lost, and the as afraid as much of a struggle as it was for Bilbo to do this last approach and enter the presence of the dragon, the presence of the treasure, its beauty, its enchantment and desire is so overwhelming, right, that it makes everything worth it. It seems like overcoming his fear there, right? It still has this effect on him where he runs away. He doesn't confront the dragon at this moment, and yet um, he has, in his mind, really accomplished something amazing here, right? He is a burglar, um, uh, proving it with his with his stealing of the cup here. Um, so again, that quote that he brings up here, more like a grocer than a burglar indeed, that's going way back to the beginning of the story, right? When he sort of stands up for himself and takes on the responsibility of coming on the adventure, and now he's come to the critical moment, the test, and he proves himself, right? So in some sense, as the narrator told us, this was the big moment for Bilbo. Okay, but what does he actually do here, right? Uh, steals a single cup, right? Manages to do it without waking the dragon. Um, he's acting on the uh, again, sort of the choice that he made all those months ago, to be a burglar. He's acting on that, sure, and so it is a choice. I don't want to claim that it's in totally, but it is almost, not totally, but almost against his will, right? That he does this, that he stole from the shadow, meaning he moved silently, right? So maybe a little pun there, because then he actually steals a cup from the treasure hoard. Um, I think that there's an element here of him being really under the spell of this beautiful gold, right? This incredible uh, pile of treasure. Um, so it has an element of him doing it on purpose, right? And proving himself, yes. But also it has this element of him being overwhelmed in this moment uh, to a really dangerous extent, right? He puts himself in great danger for something very, very small. Um, and yet to him, this is huge. So you can see both sides, I hope. Um, now there is a tidbit here of I guess it's sort of like Tolkien trivia. Uh, well, a couple of things. The first one, where does Tolkien get this idea for the thief to steal a cup from the dragon treasure? One possibility, uh, I've mentioned it before, the story of Beowulf, an Old English poem whose author is unknown. This story is one that Tolkien knows really, really well. And towards the end of Beowulf, uh, there is a scene with a thief, a small, insignificant sort of character, right? No great warrior or hero. This thief sneaks into the dragon's hoard, takes a cup, and that is what wakes the dragon, which leads to the kind of final battle of the poem of Beowulf. Um, so this idea of a thief stealing a cup, maybe, likely, uh, Tolkien has in mind this older story that he knows well and really, really admires and loves. Um, the second thing, maybe a little more obscure here, um, in the original story of The Hobbit, uh, Tolkien had this idea that he would have Bilbo, of all people, actually do the dragon slaying. So not only to be a burglar, but actually to stab Smaug in his sleep, I think was the plan, and with his incredible luck, right? That one blow proves to be Smaug's downfall. Uh, that's the original story. And how does Bilbo escape? He sort of floats out of the dying dragon's struggles. He floats out on the blood of the dragon in a cup for a boat. All right, so that was Tolkien's original plan, not in the final story here, but just a fun little piece of trivia there. That was the initial idea. Um, okay, so the uh, the dragon wakes up, as we said, notices right away that something's missing, that he's been burgled, and um, and doesn't take that very well. So there they would have all been killed if it had not been for Bilbo once again. Quick, quick, he gasped. The door, the tunnel, it's no good here. Roused by these words, they were just about to creep inside the tunnel when Bifur gave a cry. My cousins, Bomber and Buffer, we have forgotten them. They are down in the tunnel. Or sorry, down in the valley. They will be slain, and all our ponies too, and all stores lost, moaned the others. We can do nothing. Nonsense, said Thorin, recovering his dignity. You cannot leave them. Get inside, Mr. Baggins and Balin, and you two, Fili and Kili. The dragon shan't have all of us. Now you others, where are the ropes? Be quick. Those were perhaps the worst moments they had been through yet. Horrible sounds of Smaug's anger were echoing in the stony hollows far above. At any moment might come blazing down, or fly whirling round and find them there, near the perilous cliff's edge, hauling madly on the ropes. Up came Buffer, and still all was safe. Up came Bomber, puffing and blowing while the ropes creaked, and still all was safe. Up came some tools and bundles of stores, and then danger was upon them. A whirring noise was heard. A red light touched the points of standing rocks. The dragon came. So this incredibly suspenseful moment here. We're told again, Bilbo saves the day, like with the spiders, like with the elves, right? Uh, he's the one who keeps his head and tells them to get into shelter quickly before they're spotted. But it's also the dwarves, right? The dwarves really step up here and are incredibly brave. in what is perhaps their worst moment yet, right? The most dangerous moment in this whole adventure, once the dragon is actually awake and on the rampage. The dwarves put themselves in danger to rescue the the couple that are still down below with all of their stuff, right? And they do rescue pretty much everything, it seems like, except for the poor ponies, right? Ponies got eaten by the goblins. Now the ponies are about to be eaten by the dragon. So ponies just don't have a good record so far in the story here. But the dwarves are still all together, right? And again, yeah, it's Thorin who proves to be a good leader here. He, sorry, the narrator. By he, I mean the narrator. Gives us these short and very specific little images here and bits of sense description. A whirring noise, so the wings of the dragon perhaps, and the wind of his passage. A red light, again, danger, right? Destructive power of the red fire. And the last one here is just great. The dragon came, right? So you can really picture their suspense, their fear in this moment, and then the dragon came. Fantastic. Smaug. All right, so goes on his rampage, doesn't find them, goes and chases down some ponies, right? Has a snack, and then heads back and lays in wait, right? So he is sort of luring the burglar back down here. Smaug certainly looked fast asleep, almost dead and dark, with scarcely a snore more than a whiff of unseen steam, when Bilbo peeped once more from the entrance. He was just about to step out onto the floor when he caught a sudden thin and piercing ray of red from under the drooping lid of Smaug's left eye. He was only pretending to sleep. He was watching the tunnel entrance. Hurriedly, Bilbo stepped back and blessed the luck of his ring. Then Smaug spoke. Well, thief, I smell you and I feel your air. I hear your breath. Come along, help yourself again. There is plenty and to spare. But Bilbo was not quite so unlearned in dragon lore as all that, and if Smaug hoped to get him to come nearer so easily, he was disappointed. No, thank you, O Smaug the Tremendous, he replied. I did not come for presents. I only wished to have a look at you and see if you were truly as great as the tales say. I did not believe them. Do you now? Said the dragon, somewhat flattered, even though he did not believe a word of it. So the personality of the dragon, we're told, is rather overwhelming, right? It's rather powerful. We saw his anger, right? Strong evidence of how wrathful and angry and mad, terrible Smaug can be when he sees even one little thing missing from his treasure, right? So that tells you a lot about Smaug right there, right? He doesn't use the treasure for anything. He can't possibly miss the cup for any sentimental reason or anything, right? He stole this treasure. It's not his. And yet, when that one little thing is missing, he's furious and goes about taking his revenge immediately, right? Which is quite terrible. A terrible sort of greed of being a dragon there. And here we see another side of his personality, the clever side, the sneaky and persuasive words of the dragon. And this too, the narrator calls his spell, right? So the word spell, of course, can have this kind of magic idea to it, but really it just means like a story or something you say. That's a spell. Like we say when we spell a word, right? That's same idea here. So Smaug's speech is kind of trying to put a spell on Bilbo to lure him out and catch him. But so both of them are sort of doing this dance here in trying to persuade the other. Bilbo is not quite so unlearned in dragon lore, right? So he knows a little bit about dragons from all the stories he's heard and songs, right? Um, so how does Bilbo talk to the dragon here? What is he doing? And then we're also told on the dragon side, he's somewhat flattered, but he did not believe a word of it, right? So the dragon is also on his guard. There's this very interesting conversation. Whoops, sorry. Here, what do you tell me? What you guys notice about the way that they are talking to one another? And as we go on here, I'll show you some more examples. Cool comments here. Bilbo and Smaug seem to almost chat formally and according to polite rules. Is this kind of like how Bilbo and Gollum followed the rules of the riddle game? Great comment. Yes, I think that's a good way to think about what Bilbo has learned, again, on his adventure, right? He's been in a situation like this before, not with a dragon, but with Gollum. It was really quite similar. And he there came out not only alive, but with something incredibly valuable, right? The ring. And this sense that he is really capable on his own, right? That was the first time he was really all alone and made it out. So yes, some kind of rules they're following here. I think so. They are very polite to one another. There's maybe an edge to the politeness, right? Um, but they do this perhaps as a way to try to get the other one to let their guard down, right? Politeness is a way of saying, I'm not a threat, right? You can trust me. You can expect, you kind of like we're told about the Baggins family. You always know what the Baggins is going to say about anything, right? That's the peak of politeness, to know exactly what's going to be said next. It's just following the rules of the game, right? Of conversation. Yeah, something like that. And it is like a riddle too, right? The riddle here is not said in the same way, but they are both trying to guess. Okay, what is the way that I can get around this opponent, right? What is his weak spot? Who is this person, right? So there is a kind of riddle underneath of the politeness. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. It's one of my favorite chapters, along with the riddle game chapter. I really like inside information here. So here's some more examples of their speaking back and forth here. I come from under the hill, and under the hills and over the hills my paths led, and through the air I am he that walks unseen. So I can well believe, said Smaug, but that is hardly your usual name. I am the clue finder, the web cutter, the stinging fly. I was chosen for the lucky number. Lovely titles, sneered the dragon, but lucky numbers don't always come off, meaning like they don't always work. They don't always do what they're supposed to. I am he that buries his friends alive and drowns them and draws them alive again from the water. I came from the end of a bag, but no bag went over me. These don't sound so creditable, scoffed Smaug. I am the friend of bears and the guest of eagles. I am ring winner and luck wearer, and I am barrel rider, went on Bilbo, beginning to be pleased with his riddling. That's better, said Smaug, but don't let your imagination run away with you. This is, of course, the way to talk to dragons, if you don't want to reveal your proper name, which is wise, and don't want to infuriate them by a flat refusal, which is also very wise. No dragon can resist the fascination of riddling talk and of wasting time trying to understand it. There was a lot here which Smaug did not understand at all, though I expect you do, since you know all about Bilbo's adventures to which he was referring. But he thought he understood enough, and he chuckled in his wicked inside. So there's that word inside again. The inside information, of course, is what Bilbo learns, but also what Smaug learns or thinks he learns about where Bilbo comes from. All right. Smaug's insides are wicked, right, through and through. There's never a point in the story, like with Gollum, when Tolkien was first writing the story, he made Gollum less of an evil character, had to go back and revise it to make Gollum more pitiful, more horrible. Smaug is always evil, right? He's wicked. What he says is going to be simply lies. He was never going to become a kind of ally for Bilbo or anything like that. No. But this is tricky because you can't just directly confront the dragon unless you're some kind of amazing hero like Beowulf, right? Like those old heroes. They aren't heroes like that around anymore, we're told, which may or may not be true. But anyway, not in this part of the story at least. And so the way that you confront a dragon is not a flat refusal, and it's not by telling the whole truth either, right? But it's with this kind of riddling talk. That's what dragons get sucked into. That's what they like to do, right? And so Bilbo gives himself all these fancy titles, lovely titles, right? And you can tell what he's referring to with each one, I think, right? First, talks about where he's from, the hill, right? Flying through the air. Remember, flying with the eagles, right? He walks unseen. He's got the magic ring. And as for the clue finder, the web cutter, the stinging fly, all of those are from his time in Mirkwood, remember? Fighting the spiders. And again, that original story about him finding the web, the thread, and following it, that would be the clue. That's the old meaning of the word clue. So that's one thing that Tolkien doesn't revise out. He seems to like the way of the sound of it, I guess. Leaves it in there, even though it's pure luck. And then he comes to the lucky part, right? Lucky number. He mentions burying his friends alive, drowning them, and drawing them alive again from the water. What a miracle, right? That's the barrels, right? And then he makes a joke about his name, the end of a bag, right? Bag End, the name of his home, and his last name Baggins, right? Seems to be related there. But no bag went over me, right? He didn't get caught by the trolls in a bag, although he was picked up by the scruff of his neck, right? And then he makes a mistake, right? Ring winner, luck wearer, and barrel rider. Well, that's where Smaug, aha, I know where you come from, and thinks he knows what sort of people must have helped him, even though he can't tell from the smell what sort of person Bilbo actually is. He knows that the barrels refer to the river, refer to the lake, so he's going to go and take his revenge on the lake people, the lake men. Yeah, so if you ever find yourself in this situation, now you know how to talk to dragons. Good. There's also a series here of, maybe you noticed this, they come up again and again, a series of these kind of sayings. And it's kind of interesting because they come from Bilbo's father, right? Not the Took side, but the Baggins side. So these are Baggins sayings. This is when they're when they're trapped in the tunnel for the second time, right? So the first time the dragon doesn't see them, comes back, pretends to go to sleep, and lures Bilbo out, and they have their conversation. The second time, now the dragon has snuck out and is sneaking up to see where that secret tunnel might let out, and is almost going to catch them when Bilbo gets this feeling that it's time to hide in the tunnel again. And just in that nick of time, right, they close the door, and then they hear this rumbling outside. Smaug smashing the mountainside with his tail buries the exit of the tunnel. So now they're trapped in the tunnel. We are trapped, they groaned. This is the end. We shall die here. But somehow, just when the dwarves were most despairing, Bilbo felt a strange lightening of the heart, as if a heavy weight had gone from under his waistcoat. Come, come, he said. While there's life, there's hope, as my father used to say, and third time pays for all. I'm going down the tunnel once again. I've been that way twice, when I knew there was a dragon at the other end, so I will risk a third visit, when I'm no longer sure. Anyway, the only way out is down, and I think this time you had better all come with me. So a couple of days, apparently, or it feels like to them at least, they're not sure how much time has passed. In the meanwhile, no sound of Smaug. He doesn't seem to be there. There's no light down there, right? And so Bilbo, sort of in this moment, when the dwarves are at their lowest point, gets this light feeling, this hope, in a sense. We've seen this before. Remember with finding the secret door. All right. And so he steps up again and he says, third time's the pays for all. All right. It's an old fairy tale idea, right? Things come in threes. There's something about that that's sort of, there's a magic to it, or it's just the right sort of thing. You might think about it in terms of the way that each of those trips down the tunnel worked, right? The first one was just a sort of overcoming his fear. The second time, having to interact with the dragon, right? And now the third time, most mysterious of all, right? Is he even there or not? So there's this kind of, again, there's this hope, this glimmer of hope that they have to, but he has to act on it, right, to see if it's true. Now, that's his father saying, where there's life, there's hope. And you might not need to use that a whole lot if you're a comfortable sort of Bagginsy Hobbit, right? And yet you still have that saying. And this is true of a lot of everyday life, right? As the narrator keeps reminding us, we're quite comfortable in our homes, probably, or wherever, reading this story of great adventures and great dangers, and we love that sort of thing. But we don't necessarily have those kinds of adventures ourselves. And that's great, right? We can still appreciate them. But part of what we like about adventure stories is that they give new meaning to these kinds of phrases which have just become cliches. Where there's life, there's hope. You can say that, and maybe it means something to you. Maybe you've had a really dangerous experience or something. But when you read an adventure story of actually going down and facing the dragon, right, then that saying takes on a new meaning, and you can sort of feel, and not just say it, but really feel the truth of it, right? There's something to that. It's the power of words, of language. Remember, Tolkien is really interested in that. And for him, language is something that has to really be alive to carry its full meaning, right? And so here we have Bilbo taking that saying from his Baggins side and acting on it and doing this risky and adventurous thing, right? So again, the Baggins side, the Took side, fitting together, leading to a great outcome here. What does he find? Right, brave as he is to go back down, the Arkenstone. It was the Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain. So Bilbo guessed from Thorin's description. But indeed, there could not be two such gems, even in so marvelous a hoard, even in all the world. Ever as he climbed, the same white gleam had shone before him and drawn his feet towards it. Slowly it grew to a little globe of pallid light. Now as he came near, it was tinged with a flickering sparkle of many colors at the surface, reflected and splintered from the wavering light of his torch. At last he looked down upon it, and he caught his breath. The great jewel shone before his feet of its own inner light, and yet cut and fashioned by the dwarves who had dug it from the heart of the mountain long ago. It took all light that fell upon it and changed it into 10,000 sparks of white radiance shot with glints of the rainbow. Suddenly Bilbo's arm went towards it, drawn by its enchantment. His small hand would not close about it, for it was a large and heavy gem, but he lifted it, shut his eyes, and put it in his deepest pocket. Now I am a burglar indeed, thought he. But I suppose I must tell the dwarves about it sometime. They did say I could pick and choose my own share, and I think I would choose this, if they took all the rest. All the same, he had an uncomfortable feeling that the picking and choosing had not really been meant to include this marvelous gem, and that trouble would come of it yet. All right. The heart of the mountain, right? We were told before this is the root of the mountain, kind of a vegetable image, right? Natural. In this case, the heart of the mountain, like the mountain is a living thing. And in a sense it is, right? Because it's the home of Thorin's family and his inheritance. And this is the thing that Thorin prizes above all else in the treasure. We find out that there's this kind of personal attachment to this one gem. And Bilbo finds it, remember, like in Tolkien's drawing, at the top of the pile. So apparently Smaug thought it was pretty important too. And he takes it. He shuts his eyes when he does that. It's like he doesn't want to see what he's doing in some sense. He knows it's wrong. He knows this can't be what the dwarves meant by him choosing his own share, and yet he does it, right? Which is interesting. So this is another kind of turning point in Bilbo's story. We'll have to look at more later. He, the narrator, that is, describes in great detail what the stone does with light, right? The shining jewel that takes in the light and reflects and splinters it, right, into this kind of brilliance. How does it do that? Well, it seems that as impressive as the stone was when they found it, the dwarves were the ones who cut and fashioned, right? So this is the height of their artistic power, their creative skill and genius is in, in, is put into and cut into the stone, right? So they took something from nature, from the mountain, and they added to it with their skill and their art, and now it's even more beautiful, right? That seems to be the pattern here. That seems to be part of the reason, I suppose, that Thorin wants it so badly, right? It represents the pinnacle, the peak of the abilities of dwarves and what it means to be a dwarf, right? Is to do this sort of thing. Bilbo takes it under the enchantment, right? This magic draw of the stone. The Arkenstone. Wow, great name. Okay. Trouble will yet come of it. Here's what we see. A bat spooks him. He drops the light, and then he calls for help. The dwarves, little by little, overcome their fear and go out to see what's wrong. Only a bat and a dropped torch, nothing worse, he said in answer to their questions. Though they were much relieved, they were inclined to be grumpy at being frightened for nothing. But what they would have said if he had told them about at that moment about the Arkenstone, I don't know. The mere fleeting glimpses of treasure which they had caught as they went along had rekindled all the fire of their dwarvish hearts. And when the heart of a dwarf, even the most respectable, is wakened by gold and by jewels, he grows suddenly bold, and he may become fierce. The dwarves indeed no longer needed any urging. All were now eager to explore the hall while they had the chance, and willing to believe that, for the present, Smaug was away from home. Each now gripped a lighted torch, and as they gazed, first on one side and then on another, they forgot fear and even caution. They spoke aloud and cried out to one another as they lifted old treasures from the mound or from the wall, held them in the light, caressing and fingering them. Right, so the dwarves, too, seemed to fall under the spell of the treasure. And we're told that the way that this happens with the dwarves is a kind of kindling, right? Like the image of starting a fire. Once you start that fire in the dwarves' hearts, they can become fierce, they can become dangerous, right? So, although it might turn out to have troublesome consequences, it seems to be wise here of Bilbo not to tell the whole truth about the Arkenstone. It might make you remember the ring, right? That was another time when he kept something back, right? He kept it concealed. And the ring, as we'll see, if you read more of Tolkien's writing, the ring becomes something very, very important later. At this stage in the story, it's just a ring that turns Bilbo invisible. It's very useful, right? The Arkenstone is kind of like that too, right? It's this thing that Bilbo finds by luck, also through his bravery, that he takes for himself, even though it's not really his, right? But it seems like it's going to turn out for the best, right? That seems to be the impression of all the dangers that we've faced so far. Each one more than the last, right? More horrible and disastrous and scary and frightening, right? All of that. Each one Bilbo has faced and come out okay. So here again, the dwarves are recovering their bravery, fired by the desire for the treasure. Right? This is when they They began to play music again. Fili and Kili were almost in merry mood, and finding still hanging there many golden harps strung with silver, they took them and struck them, and being magical, and also untouched by the dragon, who had small interest in music, they were still in tune. The dark hall was filled with a melody that had long been silent, but most of the dwarves were more practical. They gathered gems and stuffed their pockets, and let what they could not carry fall back through their fingers with a sigh. Thorn was not least among these, but always he searched from side to side for something which he could not find. It was the Arkenstone, but he spoke of it yet to no one. Now the dwarves took down mail and weapons from the walls and armed themselves. Royal indeed did Thorn look, clad in a coat of gold-plated rings, with a silver-hafted axe in a belt crusted with scarlet stones. All right. So they, again, there's this link between their musical abilities and the weapons that they've also created back in the past, right? So ancient music, ancient armor and weapons, putting on this this description of Thorin. He's looking now like a king, right? Royal. But also he looks a little like the dragon. Remember, Bilbo got a good look at Smaug's underbelly, right? As armored and plated as Smaug is all around, there's that one spot that's weak. What's Thorin's weak spot? Right? Right? He's looking and looking for the Arkenstone, and he won't tell anyone. So Thorin and the dragon. Here we see them kind of parallel, or at least like one another. Yes, a good comment here, but they still don't have much of a plan for the dragon. Reading this for the first time made me so nervous. Yeah, that becomes more and more clear, right? So as much as they're celebrating their little success here, what was the plan, right? That's something Smaug pointed out too, and it makes Bilbo doubt the dwarves, right? So there's that little seed of doubt now. Did the dwarves have a plan that they weren't telling him? Did they just not think about how they're going to deal with the dragon? Yeah, yeah, it's a problem. All right, but they do reward him. Mr. Baggins, he cried, here is the first payment of your reward. Not actually the first payment, right? He doesn't know that. Cast off your old coat and put on this. With that, he put on Bilbo a small coat of mail wrought for some young elf prince long ago. It was of silver steel, which the elves call Mithril, and with it went a belt of pearls and crystals, a light helm of figured leather, strengthened beneath with hoops of steel, and studded about the brim with white gems was set upon the hobbit's head. I feel magnificent, he thought, but I expect I look rather absurd. How they would laugh on the hill at home. Still, I wish there was a looking-glass handy. All the same, Mr. Baggins kept his head more clear of the bewitchment of the hoard than the dwarves did. Long before the dwarves were tired of examining the treasures, he became weary of it and sat down on the floor, and he began to wonder nervously what the end of it all would be. I would give a good many of these precious goblets, he thought, for a drink of something cheering out of one of Beorn's wooden bowls. I thought that was a really interesting moment, right? So he does think about people back home, and yet he's sort of proud. You know, he does want to see what he looks like with this elven armor on. So now he's got the elven knife. He's got the elvish armor. It's beautiful, right? That will again play a big role later. So it's a good thing he has it. And he compares the goblets here, the golden treasure, right? That's the first thing he stole, and he compares it to Beorn's wooden bowls, right? So something that's in between the lonely mountain and the hill at home, kind of right in the middle actually, is Beorn's house. It's partly wild, it's partly friendly, right? And that's what he thinks back to. I thought that was really interesting. Beorn is a good person to think of too, because if we've met one character so far who might be able to, you know, stand up physically to the dragon, maybe it's Beorn, you know? That's a thought I had too. He, again, reminds me of Beowulf, partly the name, partly the bear thing. Anyway, so we've got silver steel. Bilbo is looking the part now too. But this question, right? Where's the dragon? What's going on? It's been days since he's left the hoard behind, so something has happened. Come, come, said Thorin, laughing. His spirits had begun to rise again, and he rattled the precious stones in his pockets. Don't call my palace a nasty hole. You wait till it has been cleaned and redecorated." "That won't be till Smaug's dead," said Bilbo glumly. "In the meanwhile, where is he? I would give a good breakfast to know. I hope he is not up on the mountain looking down on us." That idea disturbed the dwarves mightily, and they quickly decided that Bilbo and Balin were right. "We must move away from here," said Dori. "I feel as if his eyes were on the back of my head." "It's a cold, lonesome place," said Bombur. "There may be drink, but I can see no sign of food. A dragon would always be hungry in such parts." Yes. So they're getting nervous too. They are very exposed here in the front gate, right? Looking out over the landscape, wondering where the dragon is out there, right? That's sort of the mystery, right? And in a way, that's much worse than knowing that the dragon is on the treasure, is not knowing where the dragon could be. We know he can be sneaky, crafty, and of course, very destructive and deadly. So they make a plan to head to a more remote and protected spot, one of the lookout towers down the mountain that Balin knows about. They kind of hole up in there, and then we shift gears. First, I did like this again, this description of the hole versus the palace, right? We've seen this time and time again. Bilbo's home is a hobbit hole, right? Not a dirty, nasty hole. It's a hobbit hole, and that means comfort, right? So Thorin is kind of saying the same sort of thing here, right? I know it looks bad right now. There's been a dragon in it for ages, but we'll clean it up and it will look good again, right? So there's this kind of pride and a belonging that is really emphasized here. The connection between Bilbo's home, right? He would give up a lot of breakfasts to know where the dragon is, right? So this is another measure. I mean, that's pretty impressive to hear from Bilbo Baggins, right? That he would give up breakfast for anything is quite remarkable. Very practical, right? He was the first to break the spell of the treasure. He found out about the dragon's weak spot, right? And that there, as they discuss that, remember, there's this little detail about the thrush, the bird, that helped Bilbo figure out the secret door. It seems like one of those birds is listening to them. And Thorin explains, "Oh, those birds in the old days, the people of Dale could understand their speech, right? So another ancient language that might be important. So keep that in mind." It overhears the story that Bilbo tells of the weak spot in the dragon's armor that the dragon doesn't seem to know about. He thinks he's invincible. Anyway, that'll be for tomorrow. Next time, we're going to talk about chapters 14 and 15. This chapter 14 takes us away from Bilbo and the dwarves. So for the first time, we spend a whole chapter that Bilbo doesn't appear, right? His words do, though, which is important. So we'll still see some of these same themes that we've talked about. So specifically, watch out for luck, again, and for leadership. What does it take to be a leader in this kind of adventure? So first question to think about, we meet a new character, Bard. He's described as grim voice and appearance. His grimness, how does that kind of fit with the shift that takes place in the story here? We shift away from Bilbo, and you'll see, it's a fantastic chapter. We had this kind of calm chapter in between, the face with the dragon, and the exploring the treasure. Now we're going to again ratchet back up to danger again. The dragons in action in chapter 14. How does Bard fit with that? And then in the next one, why can't the leaders come to an agreement, right? These are all characters who seem to have a stake in what's going on. They all have something to gain, they all have something to lose, and yet they can't figure out a way to settle their differences. So why is that? That's what we'll be looking at tomorrow. Again, follow us on YouTube. Send us emails, camp@signumu.org. Share your thoughts, share your questions, journals and activities that you've liked. that you have feedback about, let us know, and do please register signumuniversity.org/academy. That's where we'd like to hear from you. Thanks again for reading along and discovering The Hobbit with me, exploring The Hobbit. We've got only a few more classes here to go in the Hobbit camp, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Till then, happy reading.